All right. Welcome back to Dev Day at UnblockConf21. This is the Test Analytics Deep Dive webinar. I am Nick Rycar, Technical Product Marketing Manager, and I am joined by...
I'm Grant Colegate, lead engineer at Buildkite in the Test Analytics team.
Right on. Thanks for joining me, Grant.
No worries.
I'll kick things off with a little bit of an overview of Buildkite, and hopefully I'll do you proud giving a bit of an overview of Test Analytics, and then I will hand you the baton and we'll see it in action.
Sounds great.
But if you're just joining us, or if this is your first look at Buildkite, Buildkite is a platform for running fast, secure, and scalable continuous integration pipelines on your own infrastructure. We're built on a hybrid SaaS CI/CD model where we aim to bring the convenience of a hosted platform with the security and flexibility of being able to build behind your firewall. When it comes to creating pipelines, viewing dashboards, or creating users, we provide a hosted environment for that. But when it comes to running your builds, your code never has to leave your servers. And when you're testing things, you'll be testing them on as close an environment as production as you need it to be. Now, Test Analytics is a new part of Buildkite, just recently released in closed beta. And when we put it together, our product engineering folks put together a problem statement about the issues that engineering teams face day to day with the performance and the reliability of, TLDR, slow and flaky tests suck. And
they certainly do.
Yeah, and they suck in a pretty unique way, because what we end up needing and what Test Analytics provides is a way to understand your tests, to diagnose them, and most importantly, to trust them. When we had the bevy of memes the other day, this one's by far my favorite, and it was the one that was like the comedian type joke. I wanted one for the devs, because how do I encapsulate everything in a nutshell better than the feeling you get when you see a timeout? Because what do I know about my test when I get a timeout back? I know it failed. I know it took about as long as it possibly could to fail, and I have no idea if it failed legitimately. A timeout can happen for any damn reason. Did the internet go out for a minute? Like, what happened? So I know things are broken, kind of, but I don't know whether I have anything I actually need to fix. So that's where Test Analytics comes in and allows us to configure what sort of our tolerable thresholds are for performance and reliability, so that we get proactive alerts whenever our tests go outside of those thresholds. We'll have historical trends that can provide context, and I can see things like, yes, that is a flaky test, and that sure does look like a timeout if I look at the time of execution versus everything around it. We'll go beyond that, though. Take those insights and dig into deep analysis, where we can see exactly what database queries and network calls our tests and code have been making, so that finding those slow and flaky tests and fixing them becomes easy. Or, well, I never like to say, like, that's the thing I have to get the hang of. It's like, it becomes feasible. Like, you have the data you need, however easy or hard the fix actually is. But sort of that's about as much preamble as I want to give. I want to let the product steal the show today. So with that, Grant, I pass the baton to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, let's get started. Where's my share screen button? And I've got one of these. So yeah, Test Analytics all starts with a suite. So a suite in Test Analytics lines up with a test suite based on a single test framework. So in our case, it's our Aspect for our Buildkite, monolith built with Ruby and Ruby on Rails. So here we see the suite. Its most recent run of our test suite here is failing. in this case with test analytics, that's not a failing build or a failing job. That is a job that has a failing test in it and could have been subsequently retried and passed. But here we're surfacing that it still failed because we want to know about those test failures early on. That's the mindset that we're in when we're looking at test analytics. There's further detail about the last 20 runs and whether they pass or failed, when they happened, and some averages around our suite's runtime, reliability, and the number of runs over the last 7 days. So it gives us a bit of a quick look into the state and health of things, but we can dive deeper. When we do dive deeper, we start getting a look at various things over the last, various metrics over the last 7, 14, or 28 days. More interesting is how, in our case, our runtime is pretty stable when that pops up. It's usually quicker than this. I haven't clicked on it today.
Well, it knows that we're demoing, Grant.
Yeah, no, it knows we're doing a demo. So you can see our run times over each day are pretty steady. We don't have like any real spikes in runtime for our suite. But our reliability changes quite a bit, and we've got a theory on which test it is in our suite that's flaky, and I've left it in there as a way to demo how we might identify that as part of this. We won't fix it here and now, but we'll dive in and see if we can figure out which one it is. We also surface, each time we run a test inside our test runs, we execute a test. That is evaluated against some monitors that are configured for our branch in here. So on main, we have monitors around the runtime of our tests and the reliability of our tests. So in our case on main, we want to know if any test fails ever, even at least once. So in the last 7 days, if a test has failed once, so the reliability drops below 100%, we'll get alerted for that test. And that will pop up here in the alerts. And it shows up a few different places. And the plan is to send these out as notifications to things like email, Slack, GitHub statuses, and webhooks as well. So further action can be taken on the part of the developers. We start looking at more of a breakdown of the last 100 runs and their runtime and pass and fail state. And then more detail about those runs specifically. We have whether they passed or failed and how many tests inside that run actually did fail. So if we click through, and we can have a look at this one here and see what failed inside this run. It is on main, so anything that failed here is likely to be a legit flaky rather than a potential failure from someone's broken working branch. So we can dive in and see what might have happened here. We have at the top, this is the same message built from branches or pull requests or commit messages that we see in the Buildkite pipelines product. We surface that here. We have the pass or fail or running. We have the commit SHA for this run. We have a link off back to Buildkite pipelines for the build that triggered this run, when it was done, and then some general metrics around around what happened in this run and how it fits within the distribution of the most recent 25 runs in this case. So we can see that this one has one more failed execution, failed test execution than the median, and it sits in the 82nd percentile for our last 25 runs. It's also slightly slower. It is in P68 for the average execution duration. It has slightly more total executions, which indicates that there were more retries inside this build than there were in other builds. So it has had those flakies happen. And then the duration, of course, because we've had retries, is also slightly slower than the median. We have on this page the alerts that were triggered during this run. We have failed tests that happened inside this run, and we have the slowest tests inside this run. Some of those are legitimately slow because they're always slow. Maybe we can optimize those. Others are slow because they've hit timeouts. And we'll see about one of our flakies as we dive a little deeper. Oh, the demo gods aren't smiling on me. today. Failed to load content. Behind here, what we do is we pull down from Amazon S3 all of the span data from within those test executions, and we show things like the slowest database queries, the most tests with the most, the slowest HTTP calls, and some other things that might be database intensive tests or network intensive tests based on counts or durations. So yeah, let's have a look at, we have one of our alerts here that's matching up to style guide Ruby here, and also one of the failing tests in this one was also in the style guide. So let's have a look at this one and see what pops up for this test. So we can see over time that this test has it's not 100% reliable over every day. It sometimes flakes. So we've got the last few days, it's been fine, but then it's dropped down in reliability and it's flaked a few times. And it's come back up and been okay. So we do have ourselves a flaky by the looks. But if we dive deeper, we can start seeing that usually this test executes in somewhere between 1 and 5 seconds. But then when it does fail, it hits a timeout and flakes. And you can see those times, those times in which it's flaked. And we can dive a little deeper when we find one of these test executions for this. We can see here a breakdown on the right of what's happening inside these tests, how many spans are being called for various things. So in this case, we have 18 seconds of HTTP spans with about 1,064 spans, which is drastically different to a passing one that has 41 or 39, around 40 odd spans. And that seems suspicious. What's going on? Let's have a little bit of a deeper look and see what we can find. So in here, we start seeing a bit more detail on this individual test execution that failed. We have a similar overview to how it fits within the distribution like we saw on the run page, but this is an individual test execution from within a run. We have a link here, which will, instead of taking us just to the build in which this occurs, it takes us straight to the job and opens the log output from that job that ran this test. And we can start diving in and seeing things like failure reasons or whether there was retries, things like that that might have happened around that job. We have where this sits in the duration, in the distribution for duration, SQL and HTTP, and how this one here is very much on the upper end of the distribution at the 98th percentile. And that's because, as we saw, our failed ones hit timeouts, whereas our others are consistently quite quick. So we can start looking through and seeing things like, what are our slowest SQL queries? What are our slowest HTTP requests? Things like that. But that's not where it gets most interesting in the case of our timeout. In the case of our timed out Selenium test that we have here, we get a timeline of every single span that's occurred within this test. And if we scroll down, we start seeing a bit of a pattern. Keep going. And here we go. We see that Selenium itself here is polling, looking for a particular element to be present on the page. And it does that for 30 seconds until it decides that it's reached the timeout and that thing doesn't exist on the page and it fails. And what we think is happening with these is we have a style guide within our admin that we test to see if it's there. And that style guide is about some of our view components and things like that. And the first step in this test is to log in, and then it's to visit the admin page. And what we think is happening is there's an out of order operation happening where the cookies from the sign-in haven't been set before we try and visit the admin. And when we visit the admin, we're seeing the access denied or 404, and Selenium sitting here polling, waiting to see if it can find the style guide, and it never does. So that is a bit of a deep dive into diagnosing a flaky. We can also see some around performance as well. So we can see this one did flag a performance one. We could have arrived here from an alert. If we click on that, we can see on the alert page what happens over time with this test and this alert. So we can see much the same view we saw on the test page and get a feeling for how this test might fit within, over time and what might be happening. And we can see the same execution breakdown and go through that and see what's happening over time. And we can also do some workflow management around these alerts. So we can resolve them in the case where we think they might be fixed. If they happen again, they'll pop up as a new alert, or we can mute them where they'll continue to have occurrences matched against this alert, but we won't do any notifying and things like that, so that we can keep things quiet while they're being fixed. And that's the general gist. So in the case of here, what we might do is do one last thing on how we get to this point where we have a suite set up. So, a test, delete me. I don't want to delete you. I want to make another one. So this is this current onboarding for Test Analytics. So you come in here and we can set up its suite. Let's call this one Webinar Test. And we can set up a default branch name. So this allows us to have all our branches tested and matched against monitors, but also have our main branch as really the place where we want these insight on flakies. Generally, if things for us hit the main branch and they fail, it's unlikely that they've got there because the merge is actually broken. It's more likely to be a flaky. So we want to take a deeper look in that. So we can get started on there, and we arrive at our point to set up our test suite. So at the moment, we're only supporting Ruby RSpec, but we have plans in the works for supporting, next up is JUnit XML, and then likely after that will be Jest. So in the case here, we have how to set up the gem, all the steps involved there. And then when that's set up and you run the first run, either in CI or in your local development machine, will automatically take you over to the run page view that we saw earlier, which I'll go over to. And so we'd navigate you over to your first running run. And so you'd see this page, and in here, when a run is running, you'll start seeing a streaming in chart of all those test executions, and in real time, their pass-fail state, their durations, and get a feel in real time for how that test run is behaving. There's no waiting around for it to complete or for analysis to be done in batches overnight. We'll let you know straight away if something nefarious is happening within your run. And that is about all of it. Oh, well, while we're in here, let's go back to our test one that we set up. And we'll have a look at the setup of cheeky and get in further than you otherwise usually would in the flow. And we'll go into our monitors and how we set up our monitors. So in this case, by default, it hasn't got any configured, but we can set some up. Let's go with one for reliability. And in here, we can take a look at, we want the reliability, let's say over the last 7 days. And on main, we might want to do runs. So we could do it over, say, if 7 days is not enough runs or too many runs that you think you might want to do the analysis against. Let's go 100 runs, drops below 100% on the main branch. You can pick all branches here if you want to and do it across all, but we'll go with main for now. Submit. And then this starts monitoring all those test executions in real time as they come in and triggering off any alerts. And we can do much the same thing for runtime. So runtime is increased, decreased, or changed by a percentage. It will also shortly be by a multiple. So we could have increased by 100% compared to the median over the last, we could do 7 days here, and then on main branch. Bam. So these will sit there and all of our executions will get monitored against those. You can have multiple thresholds set up for the same branch, or you can have different conditions for all branches versus main, and different ways in which you want to do that. We're also looking at having further metrics to monitor over time. So at the moment, it's just the runtime and reliability. But it'd be great to start doing things like, did a particular test run too many more SQL database queries in the last 7 days than it otherwise usually would, or did it do more network calls than it otherwise would? Surface interesting behaviors that way. So yeah, right, that is all of it, really. I'd love to hear some questions.
Yeah, we've actually got a bunch coming in. Let's start with, there is a question on whether we plan to support Cypress integration tests.
The answer to that is yes. Yes, and. So one thing we're wanting to do is open up the API for collecting the data to anyone who wants to build an integration. There will be some that we build as officially supported in Buildkite ourselves, and others where with the documentation, if you've got something bespoke or something that's not supported officially by us yet, you can build an integration and start sending that data into Test Analytics.
Right on. There was a question about what our process is on accessibility in the world of green and red pass fails.
Yes. So what you're seeing here is our MVP. It's our early. It's had some polish, but it's not finished. We have an accessibility pass to do on this before we get to the general access release. Some of the things we've done in pipelines is that we have a few different shapes and textures around the pass-fail state. So we can look at doing that as well in here and how that might surface that way.
Right on. Let's see. There are, here is a good one. The question is whether, the mute option in the UI, does that silence the alert or does that also stop builds from failing?
It just silences the alert. One feature that we are adding is the ability to quarantine tests, so that you can mark a test that you think is flaky or too slow or some other reason as one that's in quarantine, and then via API you can pull out a list of those tests and use that list to influence what tests are run in your builds.
Gotcha. And there was a question about, that was actually the thing you mentioned early on, where the UI showed us the number of total executions, and we saw that higher than average likely meant retries. The question was whether we are or have plans to distinguish between retries and total distinct tests in the UI.
Yes, that is something that's come up through some of our beta testers as well, is how do we distinguish between an execution that is a retry and one that is just a single test. Haven't got any obvious thoughts that we can share with you here, but yes, it's definitely something we want to do. We do have in our database the distinction between a test that's part of a suite and a test that was executed in a run. So it's definitely a possibility and something that we'll be looking at.
Excellent. Let's see here. So there are a couple of things that fall into, I would call the general category of planned support. So I think rather than run through all of those, because I think like everything I'm seeing here is at least something that I think has been on folks' radar, but one that sounds relevant to some of the stuff you were talking about in the Prezzo was someone says they are a Bazel heavy company and wanted to know what it would look like to consume and analyze Bazel test results, and whether that is something that would go through a potential JUnit XML parser.
Yes, if you analyze your results and you can get those in JUnit XML format, and then that comes out, that is totally something that we'll be supporting. One of the caveats on JUnit is that we don't have that rich data from the spans. So
Yeah.
there's none of the things about database and network and that sort of thing. That's what's coming from our direct integration with Ruby and RSpec in our collector gem.
Yeah. I think actually you answered someone else's specific question with that answer, which is to say they were curious whether that event span gathering is something that would require a deep integration with a given test runner. And it's sounding like the answer to that is yes.
Yes, yes. The answer to that is yes.
All right. Some folks noticed some things that may or may not have been in the top of your menu bar there. I don't know. I didn't see anything. Let's see here. Do we know sort of which testing frameworks that we're planning to support at GA?
The hope it will. JUnit is the next one, and that will be at GA. I would love to say that we'll support Jest. It really depends on timing on whether we determine that we want to have that as a GA thing or shortly after GA. Those would be the three at this stage, yeah. But we'll definitely have full documentation on how to do integration, and we've seen pretty good, a lot of enthusiasm in beta testers so far in doing that integration. It's more detail on that is that it's a single API request to get to say start me an upload or a run, and then that returns back a URL for a WebSocket, and then it's JSON streamed over that WebSocket for each of the execution, each test execution. So as long as the right payload is sent, we start sticking that up in Test Analytics.
Right on. Here's a good question. Will we be able to retrieve test timing data for use in things like test splitting for parallelism?
Yes. We'll be able to output the median test duration via API. That's no trouble at all. Whether it will be day one or not, I'm not sure, but it's definitely a possibility that we can do that.
Right on. So this is less a question, more a comment, but thought this is interesting. A killer feature would be a way to throttle in trust for tests. Allow integration tests to be merged, but don't then fail builds until they haven't alerted for X builds.
Yeah. So we plan to be able to fully support our API for individual tests and what their reliability or their alerts are, and have people pull those down. So if there's something around how you'd like to run your tests in your environment that is based off those metrics that we have available, by all means, have at it. It sounds like an awesome use for it.
Right on. And let's see here. Here's one I think I even know. How is our test analyzer able to magically serve its database query in HTTP network times? That is, I think I know the answer to that. That's in the Ruby gem, ain't it?
It is, yeah.
And is that available for folks to peek at?
Yes, it is. It is available for folks to peek at. Find a URL somewhere.
No worries. I'll queue up a question and vamp for you. But yes, you can definitely take a look at pop the hood on our Ruby gem and see how we are doing things. And yeah, definitely game to see what folks want to play with as far as designing their own.
Yep. So quick link just popped in there. Oh, I'm not just. Oh, Michelle's beat me to it. Look at that.
Hey, look at that. Fantastic. And then there are a few questions around what are we able to share as far as timelines, either for folks on the wait list being invited in to try, or GA itself?
GA, we are looking at early next year at this stage. As for waitlist, it's really around understanding the size of people's test suites and the technologies and frameworks that they're using, because we've only got RSpec support at this stage. It's people along those lines that we've invited in, and we are looking to roll that out to more over the coming months.
Right on. All right, cool. So let's see here. Oh, we talked about that one. Do we have any information we can share at this stage about what pricing would look like for folks that are using test analytics to evaluate things from other pipelines?
Not at this stage, no.
Right on. And then I do, by the way, since there are a lot of questions about frameworks, while the answer to all of them is likely going to be some variation of TBD, I do appreciate folks giving those. That is excellent feedback for our teams as far as
it'll help us prioritize.
Yeah. As part of MVP, what manner of load testing has been done for folks that are doing large amounts of tests?
So at this stage, we are load testing against our builds and the builds of our beta testers. We have a reasonable idea of how it will perform under load, but it's still coming. And one of the things we'll be doing as we scale up before general access is inviting some larger orgs in to help us with that process of scaling up.
Right on. Okay, I think actually that has gone through all of the questions queued up. So keep the floor open for a sec. Folks have anything else they'd like to ask or see? A call out. So we are going through our Dev Day webinars. We have 2 more remaining at the top of the hour. You'll be joining my colleague Mike Mourning for Buildkite 101. And then after that, we're going to have friends from Flare and Elodal talking to us about EC2 Max some more, and I believe Bazel builds. Yes, definitely. More folks given their preferences for frameworks. Excellent. Waiting for the magic button that actually fixes my crappy tests instead of just telling me about them.
Wouldn't we all love that?
Yes.
One of the first things that I did when we set up one of the pages in the MVP was I asked the team if it was broken because our reliability was so poor on main. I was like, "Is this broken?" And it just turned out that no, we had a flaky test that was that flaky.
Yeah.
The system worked, but it was a little disappointing.
Yeah. Well, and that's been like, the part of my brain that is like perpetually devoted to building out tech demos. Like I do love how because I have some ops background, but I have never had to write test for my codes for anything outside of simple like demo use cases. So being able to take a look at kind of like our prod data and being able to I can see at a glance sort of what some low hanging fruit might be. And when, you're doing this or Keith is out, tweeting about finding timeouts, it's like, I can parse this. I have no idea how Selenium works, but I can parse what's happening here.
Yeah. I really loved that. The unsanctioned tweet threads from Keith that was like little leaking little things because it's like, here it is, it's working. People have fixed the thing. And that's great to see that happening. It's like proving the tool does what it's meant to do. It's great.
Yeah. For those looking to write their own integration, is there an interface spec that they can target?
It's not written at this stage, but it's on our roadmap for before GA.
Right on. All right, and we have about 5 minutes till.
Just one additional bit onto that is if you are
Yeah.
able to read Ruby and are that way inclined, have a look at the gem that we linked in chat, because that's a working version of the thing that's working against our API. So if you can emulate that in your language of choice, you're a few steps towards having a working collector. So there's an option while we get around to it.
I like that. Try and race the documentation is the new self-documenting code.
Yeah.
I like it. Get behind it. All right. So I guess if there are not any more questions, we'll go ahead and start wrapping things up. Again, for folks, if anyone joined in late or if you missed any sessions, do not worry. These are all being recorded and will be available on demand. If you're registered, we will be reaching out to you to let you know how to find those when they're available. Nick. And I think that'll do. So Grant, thanks so much for taking us through this and fielding the bevy questions. Yeah, and
it's great.
all of you, thank you so much for bringing your questions. This was a ton of fun.
That it was.